Hey folks, welcome to Code and Concrete, where we share the latest trends and the stories of trailblazers in the built environment. We hope you gain some insight from our wide range of topics such as real estate development and sustainability or blockchain, artificial intelligence, and data. Joining us today is Tron Jordheim. Tron is a multifaceted entrepreneur with extensive experience across diverse industries. In his role at Jordheim Consulting, he has helped many companies make remarkable breakthroughs. That's awesome. Good for you. We'll dive into what some of those are. He's also the host of the Self Storage Hawai'i unConference. This was the first time I heard the word unConference, so we're going to get into that and how it's different from a conference. And he's the managing partner of Self Storage Strategies, and he leverages his deep understanding of site selection, operations, and marketing to guide those self-storage businesses towards success. This is going to be a big episode because you've got such an awesome range of experience, a life full of wisdom. Let's dive right into that. So welcome to the show, Tron.
Oh, thanks so much, Matthew. I appreciate it. It's great to see you again. We saw each other last at the Hawaii unConference in October, where you talked to us about the future of blockchain and real estate, and that was really interesting. Everybody got a lot out of that, so thank you for doing that.
Well, it's my pleasure. I'm glad that we got to get out there, and that was my first experience with an unConference, and It's really what it sounds like. It's not a conference. It's this collective of people and community in Hawaii. You're enjoying great food and sunsets. I had never experienced anything like it. So I want to ask right off the bat,
Sure.
How did you get to the point where you said, I want people talking about self-storage in Hawaii? How did we get there?
Well, in the early 2000s, I ran one of the first self-storage outsourced call centers. That was a subsidiary of a large storage firm. Well, it's not very large. It wasn't that large then. And we ended up with about 1,500 direct customers and about 5,000 total sites that we answered the phones for. So we had a lot of clients. And the first time we did this unConference was in 2009. So, a lot of stuff happened in 2008. And a lot of clients were very nervous about what was next and what they were supposed to do. So I thought, well, the best thing to do is to get some of the brightest minds in our storage industry, sequester them for a week someplace fabulous, and let's just talk this through and see what we can come up with. And it turned out one of my clients and a friend in the industry, Barry Hoven, had a house on the Big Island. And so he had at that time been developing a cancer research funding organization to help people who are researching what they call orphan cancers to try and figure out cures and treatments for cancers that aren't, in the headlines, that sort of thing. So we did a fundraiser at his house. We got, I don't know, the first one we had maybe 20, 25 people, and it was fantastic. We just spent the time talking about what we wanted to talk about. We had some people presenting ideas, and then at noon we stopped. And everybody went out about exploring the island or hanging out with their friends. So that was fantastic. So we kept a lot of that going over the years. Basically, the idea is you get a bunch of talented, smart people together where they can't get away from each other, and they're someplace really nice. And hopefully they have their families with them, and all kinds of great conversations happen. And we've done different emphasis before. So one year we had an emphasis, I guess that was 2011. Our emphasis was on conversion rate science for websites because so many people were moving towards really turning self-storage into an e-commerce business. But how do you do that right? So we pretty much spent the whole time talking about conversion science. That was fascinating. And then this last one where you participated, I really wanted to get some of the younger, brighter minds in the business who are working on some really interesting startup ideas and let them make a bunch of connections, let them craft their stories and see what happens. And everybody thought that was really great and very valuable. So we'll see what happens next time. a little bit different all the time. And sometimes it's just the attendees putting together things based on what they're interested in. So it makes it pretty nice.
Yeah, it definitely felt at times that you let the attendees take the initiative and sort of guide, what questions do we want to ask? And that's really unique because it puts the attendee, as a customer, as the intended target audience, in charge. There's so many events where you're just a witness. You go sit in a chair and you spectate what someone on a stage is talking about, and there's a real gap in engagement, and therefore probably a gap in learning, and there's just a lot of connection and memories left behind,
I love
unrealized
that
potential.
you use the word witness for some of what some conferences may turn into, where you are just there as a witness. That's interesting. But yeah, now that you mention it, I've felt that way before at conferences. And sometimes, what I was witnessing was very valuable, but other times, my mind wandered off, or I got out of the room and went and did something else instead of hanging out and visiting and making new connections. So
I want to ask about your self-storage story, because mine is just getting started with the unConference and the connections that I've made, and now the assets that we're bringing under management or onto our platform. It's an asset class that was relatively new to me, but this has been something that people have been really niche. It's a very niche asset class, and really people have become specialized in it. So how did you get into it? And then I want to add a tag-along question to that. How has it changed, between now and 15 years ago and when you had gotten started in the asset class?
Yeah, so I started in 2000. I was looking for a new career, and Storage Mart had just been formed in my hometown of Columbia, Missouri. They had previously been Storage Trust. They wrapped up about 200 or 250 sites, went public, and then Public Storage, the largest of the REITs, took over the company, and so they were going to start all over again. And I came in to handle their sales efforts for them, because this was just the time when inbound selling was starting to be something. And I had a lot of experience in inbound and outbound selling. So I put together their sales center, their call center piece. And over the years, I guess I was with Storage Mart 15 years. We did all kinds of crazy stuff. Over the marketing programs for them, because we were being successful marketing the call center. And early on at that time, what the marketing director did was buy Yellow Page ads. That was pretty much what you did. And we were growing, getting lots of new locations. And so I was always taking over Yellow Page ads. And, now people hear about that and they think, what the heck is he talking about? But also around that time, this internet thing started getting a little bit popular. And so we thought, well, we got to figure this out. So we became sort of the Wild West half-drunk cowboys running around the, nascent internet world, doing all kinds of fun stuff. So I think there was a time when if you searched for self-storage any place in the continental U.S., you'd get 5 of our websites on the first page. So some people would say that's maybe not how you were supposed to do it, but eventually Google changed some rules and we learned to deal with those. So that was a lot of fun. We worked on that a long time. And then I also worked on other aspects of the business and really got pretty deeply involved in all sorts of things. And then when I left in 2015, I went to join my friends at Store Here Self Storage, and they were putting together a nice portfolio. And so I helped them with some site acquisition, acquiring new third-party management customers. Also, we put together a call center there that was one of the first virtual call centers in the storage business. So we had a distributed workforce back in, I guess they started in 2014 with that. So, kind of early on with that. And so that got really interesting. And so because of all of those things, people would ask me about all kinds of things. And so I would never say no. I might sometimes say, I'm not sure I know all about that, but I'll find somebody who can help us figure it out. So I just didn't say no and kept helping people with all sorts of different things. So that was a pretty fascinating way to learn the storage business. What's really changed a lot is a couple things. One, there's a ton of them now. There were not that many then. And just about every year we'd look at each other in the big meeting room and say, how can we build more of these? We've got so many of them. Are they ever going to fill up? And then, another 1,000 would come online and they'd fill up. And then, we went through this cycle so many times of saying, how could you possibly build more? But they did well. They did well. So it's been a fascinating trip, really. And I've gotten to work with some really, really talented, smart people along the way. And because I do, or used to do, a fair bit of speaking about sales and marketing and operations in the self-storage world, I learned so much from doing that, and then take that to the next person who needed some help with whatever they were trying to do with their portfolio. So it's been really pretty interesting.
Yeah, it really seems like self-storage has grown over the years. As I did my own research, I could see, more of these facilities popping up, and it's really been recognized as a stable investment. Generally, It's pretty reliable, and it's become sort of a sweetheart of the real estate industry.
Absolutely. I mean, when I started in 2000, I wasn't involved in financing any of the operations, but I'd hear stories about how difficult it was to get people to take you seriously because, you had these buildings of garage doors. And, now, holy cow, it is absolutely the darling of the real estate business, and for a lot of good reasons. So I understand that. It's been really fascinating to watch it grow, and also really fascinating to see what some of the grandmothers and grandfathers of our industry did early on to make it possible, right? One of the things they started working on probably in the 60s or 70s was how to frame the liability, right? So they decided the thing to do was to be the opposite of a warehouse, right? So if you take no care, no custody, and no control of the customer's goods, all you're doing is renting them the space and they're doing whatever they want with it as long as it's legal. That is a framework, powerful, and that has worked so well over the years to take that approach. And the other approach that they took early on was the month-to-month leases, which, even when I first got into the business, people would say, you do month-to-month leases? That's nuts. I mean, everyone in the building can leave after a month. Like, well, that's not going to happen, but I get it. So that has been very powerful because that gives you so much ability to manage pricing and manage promotions and things like that. So those are some big things that really made the self-storage business interesting.
So it seems like there's been a lot of change in marketing and how these are promoted, some of the technology that's going into it, and we'll dive into that in a little bit.
Yeah.
But what has stayed the same is a lot of the structural components of how you build these, and then the legality. Would you say that's correct?
Yes. The structural components have stayed amazingly the same. And there's been many experiments with other ways of approaching this. And in some areas, people have found other approaches that are very interesting. But on the whole, here, at least in North America, and mostly in the European countries that I'm familiar with, the actual physical property has changed very little over time.
Do you think that makes the industry a little bit easier, or I should say this asset class, because you don't have to reinvent the wheel or come up with anything super complex or creative to get started? So you could go out, a developer could buy land and build units. It seems like the real specialization is about how you actually fill those units and ensure that people are coming in, they're not leaving abruptly, timing this with cyclical things like schools, if this is near a university or when people like to move. Would you agree and I think that's kind of what your background's
I think you're right.
become.
I think that's a big part of it. That's a big part of it. The other sort of trick, if you will, is making sure you're buying it right and buying it in the right location, right? So, and it sounds very simple, but you want to be where you can get the highest rental rates you can, and you want to be in areas that are not oversaturated, right? And that sounds terribly simple, but to decide where all these things kind of fall together, pardon me, is not always so simple.
Right, right. And if it wasn't simple, then we wouldn't need to talk about unique edges in the market or strategies to get ahead. I want to dive into some of that sales and marketing that you brought to self-storage and helping operators who perhaps thought this was going to be a simple cookie cutter asset class, and kind of dive into what they discovered, perhaps the hard way, how this differs from other property types, and how you help them get over those hurdles.
Well, early on, it seemed like this was really a needs-driven, search-based business. What we found is that people inquiring about storage generally rented within a week of their inquiry. So pretty fast sales cycle, really. And then we also noticed that, once the internet started taking off and people got smartphones, most of the business was coming through web search. Whether that was their first touch or their second touch or their last touch, that's where most of it came from. Also, a big amount of the business was driven by location, right? So it's a location people drive by, they go look for self-storage, they see the website for the thing they drive by, they go, great, that's the one for me. And then within a week, they're moved in. That's basically how it works. So it's a pretty quick turnaround. And what a lot of people didn't really understand was just how complicated it can be to get the good search results you need, because you have to somehow get into the Google Maps, into the map pack somehow. And you have to somehow get to the top of the page on the most important searches that are happening in your area for, storage units, self-storage near me, those kinds of things. It takes a lot to get that done. And that becomes pretty complicated for someone who got into the storage business because they didn't want a complicated business. They wanted something simple where, they've got people putting stuff in a building and they collect the rent, right? And yeah, some days it is that simple, but to get those people in the building, it takes a lot. And that has thrown a lot of people for a loop and still does. But what that also does is that gives enormous advantages to the big companies who have big, serious, skilled marketing teams, because they're able to crush everybody on the online real estate, right? It's a real estate game, but it's also an online real estate game. And that's where some newer players and smaller players have trouble. They just can't break through and get found the way the bigger players can. So that has changed.
So that's really interesting. What I remember from the unConference is a lot of people were discussing the dynamic between these large real estate players, the REITs, and the ma and pa developers, as we might call them.
Yeah.
Would you say that the two areas where these larger institutional players have an advantage is that online real estate because they have the marketing budget, but then also the economies of scale where they can drop prices faster, they can burn through more budget because they have more capital?
Yes, exactly. Both of those are very important because many of the big players have such a huge online presence. If they add a new site in, any town USA, it's getting favored by Google. So the traditional marketing is really just taking all the things that used to work great and putting them into a digital format to get wider reach, more targeted audiences, and quicker results, right? So, a good example of something that's pretty old-fashioned is a newsletter. Right? People used to print the newsletter on a mimeograph and hand it out. And that's what your email marketing is. It's really just a newsletter. And so it's a great way to get in front of people often, because in the traditional days, you really couldn't put out a newsletter too often because it was a big effort and costly to mail it all out. Now you could send 400 emails a day and you're still paying whatever, 200 a month for the service, right? So it has really changed what you can do. Plus you can track what people do, right? In the traditional days, you had no idea what people looked at, where now you can, look at a heat map, see what they're clicking, get an idea of all those kinds of things. So you can better craft your message or better craft your conversion funnels. So that's really interesting. And then the other really sort of traditional thing that has helped self-storage is their location. And as we talked about before, the location on the first page of Google is just as important as your location on, West Main Street or wherever your facility is. So in many ways, that's a good example of what's tradigital as well. Texting is another great example because we used to send little sales letters to people. You'd say, hey, it was great to meet you the other day. Let's get together, and you'd stick it in the mail. And now you can just text them and say, hey, did you see our latest special? Click here and find out more, right? So all of these things, part of the reason they work so well is because they are just amplifying what's always worked, right? That's part of the reason they work so well. So it's kind of fun to see how that goes. And I kind of like using that tradigital term, although I didn't invent it. I like using it because it does help you when you're working on things to say, well, this really isn't anything new. I can look at what happened before, and that'll help me frame what I'm doing. And I think that's valuable.
So you've mentioned site selection a couple times when talking about, how real estate developers are getting ahead. Let's break that down just real briefly. Are these market reports? What are self-storage operators looking for that's a little bit different or unique, but confirms that they want to build a self-storage asset in that place?
Yeah. So one thing is their entitlements, right? They need to be someplace where the zoning is right, or if the zoning isn't right, they can get it right without too much trouble. So that's a big part of it. And sometimes it's worth it to take 5 years to get a piece of property entitled if it's really the right piece of property. But often that is just too cost prohibitive for someone to do that, which is another advantage the big players have. They can tie up a property that they're not going to build on for 5 or 10 years and just work it through the system, The other thing that they're looking for is they're looking for the right layout. Right. So are they going to do a single story property? Are they going to do a mix of single story and 2-story? Are they going to do a 3, 4, 5-story mega storage building? Right. And how's that going to lay out, and what's it going to look like for traffic passing by? And then they've got to figure out, okay, what sort of market is this? Who are my customers? What do I think I could charge? And then what is my ramp up possibly going to look like? And these are some things that have gotten very, very murky. Before most people started doing dynamic pricing and price changes, sometimes twice a day, you could get a grip for what the pricing was in a market. Now with dynamic pricing, and also with people doing extreme discounting for sometimes the first 3 or 6 months for people, you don't really know what you can get sometimes in a market. So there's more guesswork than there used to be. And if you're wrong, you could be very wrong. So that's tricky, right? Because, some of these nice big buildings are easily, $150, $170 a gross square foot to build. And if your income isn't matching what you need to get you to break even plus before too long, that can be ugly. And I've seen that happen with clients where they've built really nice properties and they just didn't fill up. And, everyone would scratch their head and they'd say, well, the reports look pretty good. I'm not sure what's going on here. you know. On the other hand, sometimes you have people put up a property, they go, oh my God, I filled the thing up in 14 months. What the heck? I didn't realize I was that right, you know. So those things can happen too. But it's a lot of money to put on the line. And if you're not right about pricing and you're not right about lease up velocity, it can get a little ugly.
Yeah, I always think about what you told me, that being wrong is expensive. That rings through my head all the time now. And you certainly have to be really calculated about site selection and what sort of tenants you're going to attract, and also how you're going to retain them. It seems that that's the other half of the solution. You get people in, but then you also have to keep them there. And they might not need to, depending on how much stuff they have or if they're planning on moving at some point. Have you seen churn or burn rate become, is it an issue that a lot of operators struggle with?
It's absolutely an issue. And some people have made that part of their strategy, where they know, X percent of their tenants are just going to churn. They're going to be in here for a couple months. I'm not going to be able to get any price increases, but I'm getting a little something. And a percentage of those people that I rent to are going to stay longer. And those are the people who are going to support the project, because the people who are willing to stay longer can handle rate increases. Self-storage customers in general have a lot of rate elasticity. Although here lately, there's been some operators pushing that pretty hard, and I think they've run into some demand destruction in some areas. And I think they're kind of rethinking how a lot of that should go. But I think this is pretty typical strategy. I'm just throwing numbers out, but this is some properties that I've seen. 30% of the customers will stay 3 months or less. And, maybe 30% of them will stay 12 months, and you'll have 10 or 15% who just never move out. And, so you're kind of trying to work through all that at the same time as you're trying to figure out what your cost of acquisition is. Because you don't want to spend too much money for the people that are churning, and you'd almost spend anything for the people that never move out, right? So and you can't always tell the difference. Usually you can't tell the difference who's going to churn and who's going to stay until they've been there a while.
Yeah, it's a really different business model compared to traditional industrial, where you have businesses with a lot of hardware or assets. Mm-hmm. They can't move out after a couple of months. They might be there for several years. Same thing with people in the living space. Folks like to call something home. Yeah. And unless their next door neighbors or the people stomping upstairs are really, really terrible, they'll be there for a few years. It's really a contrast to self-storage, where you use it when it's convenient, mm-hmm. It seems like.
Yeah, and some people just find it so handy to put their stuff away that they don't want to deal with it, right? Because what we learned early on was that people are not buying space when they rent a self-storage unit. They're buying time. They're trying to figure out what to do with their stuff, how to manage their moves, how to manage, whatever things they're getting from their parents or their kids, and they just need time to work it out. And once we realized that, it changed a lot of how we talk to people and the kinds of questions we asked. And we immediately saw a conversion rate bump by saying, okay, this person's not calling me for space. They're calling me because they need some months or some years to figure some stuff out.
Let's dive into that. So how did those conversations change? What were the different questions that led to you better understanding these customers and resonating with them? Well,
we just tried to get the people to talk. We'd say something like, so tell me what's going on, or what causes you to need storage today, or what sort of project are you working on that you need a storage unit? And you would get a long answer usually from people, because generally when it's time to call or go online about self-storage, you're close to the end of a project and you didn't really think you were going to need self-storage, but now you're going to need it. So you're frustrated, you're tired. And if you get somebody who's kind of halfway friendly and asking you some polite questions, you're going to tell them what's going on. And we learned so much from doing that people didn't talk about how much space they needed. They talked about either the situation they were in or how much time they needed to figure it out. Before we really understood that, we spent a lot of time talking about sizes. What size do you need? Do you need this size or that size? And try to help people do all that. But what we found was when we started talking about time, that discussion about size got much shorter and never ruined a deal. Because we used to see on occasion, you'd get somebody confused talking to them about size, and they'd leave. They'd say, I'll call you back. Wait, we were going somewhere. That didn't happen anymore after we started realizing that they're buying time. So that was an interesting learning experience.
Do you see that a lot of amenities also help close customers? Because you start to see these promotional elements. Now there's discounts or, financial incentives, but you also see air-conditioned units or 24/7 access or never interact with a manager. These little perks that have, start to pop up. Have those been, key to selling units, or are they just nice to have?
No, those have been key in most markets. You have some markets where people don't care too much one way or the other. But in almost all of the larger markets, the climate control, fully enclosed units get a much higher rate than traditional drive-up self-storage. The exception to that is areas that don't have much drive-up self-storage. Then they're actually getting more for the drive-up units because contractors and business people want to just pull up to their door to get what they need for the day and get out of there. So, you have kind of both things working against each other. But you're also seeing sort of a bifurcation, or whatever you want to call it, of the sort of traditional self-storage where maybe you have a keypad and a pin pad and you use your own lock and so on. And the smart buildings where you're just doing everything on your app. You tap a button on your app, you get access. You tap the button on your app, your door opens. If someone's messing with your door, you get an alert that says your door is being disturbed, right? So the smart buildings are doing very, very well, especially in the bigger markets. So I think we're really seeing the smart buildings outpace everybody else, and it'll be interesting to see how that turns out.
So you would agree that some of these smart buildings are commanding a premium because they're in higher demand by tenants?
Yes, and they're so much easier to use for tenants who live on their smartphones anyway. It's just so easy for them to do it that way. They don't have to mess with anything. They just, tap on their phone or whatever they're using.
Yeah, let's dive into like those functionalities. What are some new technologies or smart building functionalities that were unveiled in self-storage that sort of disrupted the asset class?
Well, so the access control for sure, where you can use your app to open the gate, open the door to your unit, and you've got a sensor inside the unit that alerts you if there's any motion or heat inside your unit. Those things have really changed the game. And yeah, they started, I don't know, they might have been working on the first ones maybe 10 years ago, but, it takes a little while to get the technology really good. So for the last, 5 or 6 years or so, there's been great strides made, and there's several different manufacturers who are working on those programs, and I suspect they'll all do well.
To inverse the question, have there been any trends that did not stand the test of time? Something that you thought was going to be disruptive to self-storage? Maybe a lot of operators were spending money to implement it, and then it just had no impact on the market?
Yeah, I can think of a couple things. The one is valet storage, right? Where the valet company brings you a couple bins, you put your stuff in a bin, they take it away to their location, and when you want it, they bring it back to you. Some of them are doing fine, but they've never gotten as big as they had wanted, and they never really put too much of a dent in the self-storage business. So that's one for sure. The other is the portable storage units. So quite a few operators built warehouse buildings to stack portable storage units and started delivering those to customers. And what many of them found was it was such a different business. It was a logistics business, a trucking business. Actually, I ran a Culligan bottled water dealership before I got in the storage business. Now, it wasn't a terribly big operation. We had about a dozen trucks, but I would not wish trucks on anyone. There's always something going on with your trucks. But that never really took off like people thought. And some big players got into it in a big way and walked away from it because they couldn't get to any kind of scale with it. Now, there are a lot of companies that do very well with it, and some are still doing a mix of portable and traditional self-storage. But those tend to be companies that have a good self-storage business and then have used the portable storage business to reach out past where their typical customer is to leave units on site. And they're doing well, but none of them are doing it at scale. So I'd say those are the two big things, valet and portable storage. I can't really think of others right now, but there may be another one or two.
Would you place U-Haul in the portable storage? When you say portable storage and trucking, is it right for me to imagine these U-Haul trucks going down the road? Because they also have self-storage facilities.
Yeah, they have self-storage facilities, and they also deliver storage units. They have their U-Box program. So U-Haul does it all. And if you want to watch a company that has really mastered this self-storage space, they're a good one to study, really good one to study. So some people in the storage business don't think about them when they're thinking about competitors, and they should, because they've gotten very, very good at it. Think about it. They started with, one or two trailers that the founder would, drop someplace for someone to pick up, and then he'd go get it and leave it for somebody else. And my gosh, the logistics they must have figured out in the first 5 or 10 years. I think they're still using that knowledge now to make things work. So yeah, U-Haul's a big player in this space.
What, if you were to put on your salesman glasses and say, a couple things that U-Haul has excelled at, and any of the major players that you wanted to see more operators adopting, or just a piece of advice. If you're going to get into self-storage, do this. What would that be?
So the big operators that are really successful are great at their financing, right? They have finance teams that just do incredible work. And that makes their cost of capital cheaper than everybody else. That helps them in so many different ways. They're also masters at multi-unit management. And multi-unit management is not easy at all. If you've got, a lot of storage operators are spread all over the place. Let's say you had 25 self-storage sites spread over 6 states. Each one of those markets a little bit different. Each one of those has a different personality, a different culture in their store to some degree. And you've got to get them all consistent and working together and humming forward. And yes, the business intelligence reports you can get now and the rapid communication you have now make it possible to do these sort of things. But some of the people who were masters at multi-unit management started doing multi-unit management when all you had was a telephone and a fax machine. They were getting daily reports faxed to them at the end of the day. So, they had to figure out a lot of ways to make that work. So I'd say those are the big things, the financing and the multi-unit management.
I want to segue a little bit to the global stage, because you've introduced me to some folks overseas who are in self-storage, and I've had the pleasure of sitting down and meeting with them. From your perspective, how does U.S. self-storage differ compared to other parts of the world? Because this is a global asset class.
Oh, yeah.
It's really prevalent wherever you go. But
Absolutely.
How does it change between jurisdictions?
One thing that's a little different in many countries, they're doing leasehold of the building or a section of the building where they have their storage, and not buying the property. That's not a fee simple transaction. They're just renting the buildings or a portion of the buildings. And to some degree, that's an advantage because you know what your cost per square footage is. So you can kind of reverse engineer that to know what you need to bring in per square foot. So there's, some simplicity there. But also, you don't have that asset value appreciation like you do if you actually own the building. So you're really just creating a cash flow business. And that is different than what happens in the US and Canada, where many times new developers or new buyers are not thinking so much about cash flow year 1, 2, 3. They're worried about what happens in, year 5 or year 7, where sure, if you're well financed, you could do that same sort of thing if you're leasing, but you probably need to get to break even plus a little quicker. So that's one thing. The other thing that's a little different is the regulations are different everywhere you go. So the US and to some degree Canada have some very well thought out, favorable rules and legislation built around self-storage, particularly around lien process if someone's not paying you. In a lot of other countries, they don't have that regulatory fallback. They have to make everything contractual. And yes, contracts typically hold up, but they hold up a lot better if the verbiage in the contract matches the verbiage in the state lien law, right? So there's that. And then in a lot of places in the world, people don't move as much as we used to here. Now, I know we haven't been moving a lot now because, price of homes has gone nuts and the interest rates have made it very difficult and so on. But there's a lot of people in other parts of the world that just don't move a lot. So they're using it really more for an extra closet or an actual storeroom rather than a place to hold their things while they're figuring out the next move or doing this or that. So the customer base is also a little different. And the use is much less than it is here. I think the last thing I looked at, the Self Storage Association was saying something like 11% of people have used storage recently. So, I mean, that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a big number. I can't imagine it's anywhere near that in places like the UK or Germany or Hong Kong or, wherever. So there is a lot of runway. The question is how that's going to happen. So you've seen some very large investment firms get very aggressive in some of these high population countries where you'd think the potential is crazy. So, they're investing big and when you come in big like that, right, you can afford to make a few mistakes and you can also afford to come in with some power and make something happen. So it'll be interesting to see what goes on.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it as well because we're trying to engage self-storage assets, leveraging, the connections that we have. Many thanks to you. And so that would be a good topic to cover right here, taking the focus off of self-storage and just talking about networking and business connections. What's your trick to facilitating global relationships?
I don't know. It may be something I was born with. I grew up in an immigrant family. My dad was from Norway. My mom was from Germany. They both spoke both languages. They also spoke some French. And so in our house growing up as a kid, you'd hear 4 languages sometimes in the same sentence. And we didn't know any better. It made sense to us. And I grew up in a neighborhood where probably half or 3/4 of my friends were in the same situation. It was their parents or grandparents who were from the old country, whichever country that was. And so somehow it got easy for me to just talk to people. And what I also really like is just to find out what people are doing, because people are really interesting and they do so many interesting things. And I guess I've done a few cool things, but really, I don't know if I've done that many of them. But it's fun to listen to what people are up to. And then it's really cool to introduce them to somebody else who's got a common interest or maybe would want to hear about that sort of thing and get them talking, and then go meet the next people and visit with them and introduce them to somebody. And I just think that's great to see a lot of people at a function just talking to strangers that, I guess they're not strangers now, but they were strangers 5 minutes ago,
Right.
That's pretty fun.
Right. Yeah, well, that's, the purpose of something like an unConference, where you have folks flying in from all over the world or the U.S. to this unique location, unique atmosphere. Forget about what you're working on, where you're from. You're in Hawaii now, and you're going to talk about self-storage. And you're making these new connections. Everyone's personal bubbles and social anxiety is a little bit dissolved. You're just there to relax and meet people. And you have these new connections that spawn out of it, new business deals. And it's really a butterfly effect, because then, people might be introduced to someone else, or they're posting on social media that they were at the event, and they go out and build a development and it's recognized, they get investment. It's unimaginable the amount of impact that just bringing a small group of people together can create. And that's why I applaud what you're doing in the event space. I've tried some events myself. It's pretty tricky. Well, let's ask an off-topic question. So you put together really great events, and you've done it year over year over year. What's your key to success for curating events?
Well, I don't know what to tell you. I think finding a good venue. So where we originally did it was just a gorgeous, gorgeous place on the Big Island, the Monolani Resort. But they did something like a $200 million renovation, and we got priced out of there. So we moved over to the Marriott at Waikoloa Beach, which has such a perfect location. There's, 6 or 8 great eating places within a 10-minute walk, and a lovely little beach and great pools. And, it's just such a great place to hang out. And it's usually not, it's not a big property. So you're going to bump into other people who are at the unConference, and, bumping into somebody coming back from a quick little snorkel on the beach is a great way to talk to folks. So I think that's the key, is to have a really good venue. And then just really let everybody know that this is, as you said, this isn't where you're supposed to be a witness. You're here to enjoy each other and to ask people about stuff and tell people about stuff. And, so many of the people that are there have similar concerns to you, or maybe have, fixed the challenge that you're having now. So it's pretty cool to watch.
Well, there's a saying that the business deals are done on the golf course or at the bar. And in this setting, it's all the vacation environment that you need to get deals done. You're not across a table from someone. You're at the beach or having a drink, at the restaurant, or enjoying breakfast together. And it's a total change in dynamic. So I want to ask, what are your 2025 plans for the unConference? Because I'm for sure going to be there, but I want as many people in self-storage to attend as possible.
So we're moving it to June, because one of the things we discovered over time is that October gets more and more crowded with other self-storage events, and becomes very, very difficult for people to schedule it in. And really, that's the one thing that stops people from coming, is their schedule gets busy. So we're moving it to June, but we're not going to have enough time to get it together for June of 2025. So we're going to do the next one in June of 2026. And it looks like it's going to be on Maui. I'm in sort of final discussions there, and it'll be pretty fabulous.
So no unConference in 2025?
Nope.
Darn.
Everyone will have to just be disappointed till the next June.
So June 2026, the unConference is going to be reinvigorated. People are going to be flying out to Hawaii to participate in that. Is the website going to be updated frequently, or where should people keep in the loop?
Yes. So it's already been updated with some of our plans. Of course, we don't have any agenda yet, but that'll come much closer to the actual event. So they can get all the information they need at HawaiiUnConference.com.
Yeah, and I'll make sure to put that link in the show notes so that people can scroll down there. I also want them to check out everything else that you have going on. So I know that you have some business consulting services that you offer, your self-storage, win strategies. I don't know if that's the title or if I move some of the words around. What else do you have going on that you want people to reach out for?
Yeah, so the easy thing is to go to tronjordheim.com, and from there you can get to pretty much everything. And I do a fair bit of work outside of the self-storage business too for other types of businesses, and it's often similar kinds of things. People are trying to figure out an operational change, or they're growing and they're not sure how to do it, or they just don't feel like they're selling enough, or their marketing's falling flat, those kinds of things. And I'm often able to be a big help. And of course, if I'm not, I know lots of talented, good people I can send them to. So.
Okay. Well, I'll make sure to have those links in the notes as well so that people can reach out and hopefully connect, talk self-storage, or just talk business strategies in general. Because you do that strategy. Is your specialization sales and marketing? Is that what you kind of categorize it as?
Yes. And that's kind of by accident. People keep asking me about it, so I keep helping them with it. So. And awesome. I guess the other part of that is contact centers. I've been in the contact center world so long, I still get people asking me to help them figure out how to make their center work better or get their conversion rates up and things like that. And I'm always happy to help.
Awesome. Well, Tron, this has been a wealth of knowledge about the self-storage, industry at large, and some tricks and tips to get ahead. I mean, site selection and the right marketing, taking care of finances and being diligent about how you want to scale, maybe staying away from certain trends or logistics so you don't get ahead of yourself. You don't have to boil the ocean when it comes to self-storage. It doesn't have to be overcomplicated.
No. Well, it's been wonderful seeing you again, and best of luck with all the things you're working on. And I'm really looking forward to when we can move the self-storage business your way, and because it would make so many transactions so much simpler if they were using something like building. So I've thought you working on that, and it's probably the kind of thing where one day you're going to get 5 phone calls on the same day, and you're going to go, "Whoa, I think this might be working."
Right. I mean, we've got a case study coming out for self-storage, and although the asset class is generally pretty simple and it doesn't need to be overcomplicated, there is more data, there's more technology being involved, and smart operators are looking to collect that, to store that, utilize it, and just preserve it for other stakeholders or the next owner. And there's real value in information. It's pretty much our thesis.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I would think that an owner of a property who had their information accessible and organized correctly according to some of your advice, it would be a lot easier to find a buyer that would pay a premium to have all that. And as a buyer, you want to know as much as you can possibly know, and you want to shorten your close time. So I think it's fantastic what you're working on. So I know it's going to work nicely for you.
Yeah, well, insurance companies want to know more, investors and lenders want to know more, municipalities. Everyone wants information. So if information is king, we got to, hold on to that, get it out there and see where the dollar signs pop up.
That's right.
Awesome. Well, Tron, it's been a pleasure. And, thank you for everyone who has joined us on this episode of Code and Concrete to learn about self-storage and some sales strategies and how to get ahead in business. Welcome everyone back to future episodes.
Yeah, and go check out building.inc. Go do it.
That'll be in the show notes as well. Thank you, Tron, for the plug. All right, take care now.
Take care now. Good to see you.
Likewise.